Well, hello everyone. Now, if you're new to this channel, or even if you're not, I don't think you've seen me do a video from this position before. I'm not usually sat down either. I'm usually standing up with the Polaroids on the washing line behind me. Well, welcome to my office. Or, if I want to sound poncy, my studio. So, the Ricoh GR III, the camera that you've probably heard of, but not everyone owns one. And in fact, it took me a while to get one. So in this video, I thought I would give you some of my own thoughts on this pocket rocket and more importantly, tell you how it fits into my photography workflow. Why I own this camera. So this is the latest version of the Ricoh compacts, the GR3. These of course started off as film cameras. And of course, there's now also the X model. You can now buy the GR3X, which has a 40mm fixed lens, as opposed to this one with the 28mm. So this is actually the only 28mm lens I own, apart from that focal length being in one of my zoom lenses. But I don't have any Olympus 28mm prime lenses. They don't do one. My default field of view these days seems to be 35mm. It's where I see most of my subjects and the field of view that I naturally frame the world. But of course, this camera isn't 35mm. So that comes to my first negative point about this camera. Now, this is of course a strange place to be starting a review of a camera, revealing its faults. But then this isn't really a camera review, just an insight. So it feels right to talk about the faults first, and then I'll work my way back and tell you why I do love this camera. Because I do. And the faults that are there are in many ways really quite a personal thing. Faults to me only. So for me, there's three things wrong with this camera. Fault number one, no viewfinder. It hasn't got a viewfinder. So all the images are viewed and captured using the LCD screen on the back alone. Now, you can pretty much guess why it hasn't got one, and no doubt it's because adding one would make it bigger and less pocketable. But this is a problem for me in particular, simply as I now rely on close-up glasses for reading and therefore viewing the screen. Not only for framing and composing, but also seeing and adjusting the settings, etc. on the screen, which is tricky without glasses. Yes, it's an age thing. This camera is a young photographer's camera in many ways, but get to 50 and it starts showing you up. But this isn't the end of the world, and I work around this. I'm just using my reading glasses to shoot with this camera when I do, as much as a pain as that is. Fault number two, the sensor. The second fault for me then is the sensor. It's an APS-C sensor, which is ideal in many ways and has plenty of megapixels, 24 megapixels in fact. So it's not the sensor itself that is at fault, but the aspect ratio. It's 3:2 format. I haven't used a 3:2 format camera since, well, 1990. No, tell a lie. My Canon 5D Mark I and Mark II, my first digital cameras, were both 3:2 format, but I hated that. Having come from using a Mamiya RZ67 medium format film camera and shooting with that for 20 years, the 3:2 aspect ratio of full frame was not a great experience, and I used to constantly crop these results down to 5:4 or 6:7, as I found that elongated rectangle of 3:2 too long for my compositions. Changing to the 4:3 format of Micro Four Thirds in 2012 then felt like coming home again, much more suited to my natural vision. So even though I've wanted one of these Ricoh cameras since they were originally a film compact, the GR1 series, I knew buying one would be a leap back into that unfamiliar format again, and it has taken time to adapt. But I think this is now becoming more acceptable to me since I got back into shooting film again. 35mm film that is, with the Nikon SLR and the Olympus rangefinder. I'm slowly learning to love this 3:2 format again, so that each day out with this camera, that quirk is becoming less of an issue for me. For you, probably not an issue at all. And of course, as you all know, one day I'm hoping my only cameras will have a red dot Leica badge on them, so I better get used to that format pretty quick. Fault 3, the lens. The third issue then is the lens. It's 28mm. Combine 28mm with a 3x2 format and that doesn't make a winning formula for me. It's not a natural framing view at all. Now luckily you can crop this and crop this in camera on this dinky digital, and I do just that. Therefore my default setting is the cropped in 35mm setting. Yes, I lose megapixels, but that's okay as there's plenty to start off with. So 90% of the shots I have taken with this camera have been at 35mm, but I am trying. I'm trying to adapt to the 3x2 format, and as a compromise I'm using that 35mm preferred focal view in full 3x2 format. See, I am trying. So of course you may be saying, and yes, I can hear you, why not just swap to the X model instead, the GR3X with the 40mm lens? Well, this would probably make sense, as if you've seen an earlier video of mine, you'll know that my daily carry at the moment is the old Olympus EP5 with the 20mm pancake lens, which is a 40mm equivalent focal length. However, this is a different camera to that. It's a compact point and shoot. It's a point and shoot with muscle, of course, though, with exposure control and amazing image quality. So I occasionally shoot at 28mm on this camera. I like being able to crop out to that full width of the lens. I think the 40mm would be a bit limiting on this tiny pocketable camera, and I actually like the casual way of using this camera. I remember someone saying that they like this camera as you can just hold the camera up and almost shoot blind with it, as it's wide enough to capture the subject and has enough megapixels to later crop if needs be. And that's exactly how I see this camera being used. It's a one-handed camera. You shoot with just the screen with your arm outstretched. I even have a little hot shoe thumb grip to help me hold and use it one-handed. It's a camera that feels right to shoot wide with and then fine-tune the crop later. That's not the way to work with any other camera, but not my usual approach, not with my Olympus cameras, but it feels the right way with this one, and I'm embracing that approach too now. Of course, the ideal scenario might be to have both models and therefore have a wide version and also have a standard lens version, and I have considered that too. But I think that would be the way to go, as in adding the 40mm version, but not getting that to replace this one. My workflow. So how and when exactly do I use this camera? How have I incorporated it into my photography, and when do I shoot with it? Why do I have this camera? Well, for several reasons actually. First, as I've said, it's a point and shoot camera that you can take everywhere. It can slip into a pocket and be a quality camera wherever you go. It's more flexible than a phone. It gives better quality than any phone image, and it works faster than a phone. This can be your everyday street photography camera, whereas in reality, your phone isn't. It's a camera to take to parties, it's a camera to capture the family with, and it's a camera for the mean streets, which will then step up and be ready to be a serious landscape camera, on a tripod if you want. It will do it all. It's a camera like no other in that respect, and therefore has no competition. If you want a camera that is this flexible and this small, then this is it. No contest. And speaking of film, as I was earlier, this is also the camera I throw in my bag when I'm out shooting film. It's my film backup. It's my film capture Polaroid, if you like. I can test framing and test composition. I can test exposures and make a black and white test shot too with this camera before committing to film. This is my accurate light meter too. And if I am shooting black and white film, yet spot an amazing colour composition, then this is always in a side pocket ready to capture that too. It complements my Nikon film SLR really well. Now, if I do want a longer focal length, and as I don't have the X model, I often carry this Ricoh in a bag alongside one of my Olympus Pen Fs. That coupled with a 50mm lens, or 25mm as it is on Micro Four Thirds. This is my wide and standard cameras focal lengths combo then. Both fit in a small Peak Design sling bag and it's minimal kit. But now I have 28mm, a 35mm, the Ricoh image cropped, and a 50mm field of view with the Pen F. One as a point and shoot, quick on the draw camera, discreet camera. The other a versatile camera with built-in viewfinder and tilty screen. It does make for a great combination. The GR III highlights. So that's how I use my GR3, but as well as the plus points I have mentioned so far, this camera may be ideal for you too, for other reasons, as this camera has other unique features up its sleeve. Now, I don't think any other camera has this feature. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but a full press on the shutter bypasses the autofocus system and snaps straight to a preset distance, so that this camera can take a picture in an instant with its snap focus feature. Gosh, can you hear the rain? There's no hunting autofocus, no switching over to manual mode and pre-focusing. This camera does that for you. It snaps into focus and it's one of the things that makes it a great camera for street photography. This is another feature that is loved by users of this camera. For those street photography captures with the sharp points of highlight and the rest of the frame dominated by shadows for impact, this is the camera to capture those. Combine that with its high contrast black and white mode and you have a camera that can capture fine art street photography pics with minimal skills. Of course, never ever refer to those results as fine art street photos, because there's no such thing. They're just photos, just like any other, but we'll not go there today. The third highlight of the camera is, well, the lens. The lens on this camera is super sharp. This camera puts my Olympus lenses to shame. You almost feel as if you need to properly apply unsharpening to your images, as they can appear too sharp. Softening your images brings them back to reality sometimes. You never feel like you are capturing inferior images with this clever compact. There's no compromise on this camera in that respect. So all of these features influence my setup with this camera on its custom mode dial. On custom setting 1, it's pretty much default. Well, default for me. Color images, snap focus set at 2 meters, but with crop mode set at 35mm. That's how I shoot by default with this camera. See a subject, draw, shoot, and it's back in the pocket before you can say, E6 subscription. Custom mode 2. For me, this is manual mode. It's set to manual but locked by default to the Sunny 16 rule on a monochrome profile. So 400 ISO, 1/500th per second shutter speed at f16, ready to take a test shot when out with my film cameras. This of course also makes an ideal default black and white mode setting when not out with my film camera too. Custom mode 3, high contrast, highlight priority, black and white pictures. That's custom mode 3. Again, preset to 2 meter snap focus, but all ready to capture those creative deep shadow views, exposing for the highlights alone, with the camera doing all the work. It needs the right conditions of course, but on a sunny day with long shadows, this camera is there ready to capture those type of results. Oh, and one of the other buttons I have changed is the one on the D-pad. A quick press and I'm cropped to a square format. I love square me, so I always set my cameras up with a square crop mode as easily accessible as possible. It's set up as a custom mode on my Olympus cameras, but on here it's a quick press right and I'm framing square, baby. In conclusion then, so would I recommend this camera? Yes, very highly. Is it for everyone? No, probably not. However, if you can make use of it and its unique features, it's a versatile camera that is both pocketable and like no other. It won't make you a better photographer. No camera can do that. But it may be the ideal one for any situation for when any other camera isn't. Plus, you're more likely to have this camera with you. And that's its selling point. That's its USP. That's why if you do need a camera you can take everywhere, you should get a GR3. But if you're already a fellow user of this camera, well, you know where I'm coming from. Now, if it just had a viewfinder, if it was a 4x3 format sensor instead, if it was weatherproof, if it had a 35mm lens by default instead, then it would be my ideal pocket camera. But then it probably wouldn't be for anyone else.